Welcome to The Lens, the Freedom and Justice Show. I'm your host, Micheal Hicks. Today, I have a very special guest. I am honored to have my brother, a musician, master musician, a professor, a councilman-elect, my co-facilitator of ADOS Louisville, Brother Professor Jacory Arthur. Brother Jacory, how are you doing today, man?
Peace, love, and justice. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. It has been a tumultuous last few months, has it not? You've had a primary election where you came out the victor amongst 7 candidates?
7 total.
All right, you got that plurality, and being a Democrat, that's pretty much seals it up for District 4. Tell the people a little bit about yourself and what has been going on with you in these last few months.
Well, to understand me, you have to understand the hats that I wear. I'm Jacory, born, raised, and proudly still living in the west end of Louisville, originally from Parkland. Now I'm in Russell, just west of downtown Louisville. I'm also known as Mr. Arthur to my little students around the community and schools, community centers, boys and girls clubs.
Yes.
Professor Arthur to my bigger students at Simmons College of Kentucky. Shout out to our HBCU.
That's right.
Also known as 1200 as a recording artist who performs and composes music, mostly hip hop, but I'm also a classically trained musician and have 2 degrees in music education, anchored in classical music from the University of Louisville. I'm Dada to my 3-year-old.
That's right.
Corey to my 13 siblings.
All right.
And pretty soon I'll be known as Councilman Jacory Arthur, to represent Louisville Metro Council District 4.
That's all right.
This district is our business district, our central business district downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods.
Yes.
So you got Butchertown on the east side, you got Irish Hill, Meriwether, Fort Hill, Smoketown, Shelby Park, a little bit of Schnitzelburg, a little bit of Old Louisville.
Right.
We got the California neighborhood.
A sizable district.
In the West End. We got Russell in the West End, Portland.
Right.
We have 16 neighborhoods that touch District 4. And I'm going to be balancing all of those interests. And like I always like to do is kind of put it into the context of some sort of scheme. I'm going to be there to communicate. I'm going to be there to educate. I'm going to be there to activate, negotiate, and legislate. That is my role as a councilman for the district.
That will be the most interesting task indeed. And what makes it especially interesting will be your political focus, ideological bent, the heart that you have in the work that you do, and it will be the type of work that some people would want to refer to as controversial. But when you are focused on your own self-interest, you'll think and believe and act on something else entirely, and that is the ADOS political project. The ADOS political project, American Descendants of Slavery. Let's, explain. Let's talk to our audience. What is ADOS?
The president of the college that I teach at, Dr. Kevin Cosby, describes it in my favorite way. He says ADOS is 3 different things. Identification, which means we have a lineage that derives from people who were enslaved, people who dealt with Jim Crow, people who dealt with injustices, special mistreatment.
Yes.
That's the identification of it. It's not just the pigmentation, it's really your lineage. It's not just somebody who's racially black, but someone who's black by a discrimination that has happened that was legal and illegal in many cases. So the identification is number 1. Number 2 is the reparations and what we do about all of the injustice that has happened to us, and that's making sure we are repaired. And that repair includes direct payments to those descendants, myself, yourself, and anyone watching this who descends from slavery, but also an entire political package, I would say, that includes protections to make sure that we are never again broken in the same way that we need to be fixed. And then lastly, concentration. So making sure we have a clear focus, because as I said, we suffered special mistreatment.
Yes.
So we need to have special treatment to address those injustices. So ADOS represents identification, reparations, and concentration.
Yes.
That is it. So many people paint so many ugly pictures of the movement that are inaccurate and that are baseless and are really dangerous, because it creates a situation where we continue to kick the can down the road of how we deal with black people.
Particularly in these times.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we have three different groups of people in this country. We have the people who already lived here. Mm-hmm. We have the people who decided to live here, which includes immigrants today, which aren't just brown people, but also white people.
Yes.
And who became white over time. And then you have us, ADOS.
Right.
Those are really the only groups in this country. And we're starting to notice that a lot of people in this justice movement who are screaming for justice for us are trying to make it an argument about white people versus everybody else. When the reality is that we are at the bottom, and everyone else, regardless of who you are, Chinese American, European American, like whatever the case may be, you are still above us.
Yes.
So it's hard to anchor ourselves and compare ourselves to groups that look like us but really don't live like us. And we've just been tricked and confused for too many decades. And now ADOS has made you confront the reality of our situation in this country.
Yes.
And the reality is that it's not about race, it's about lineage. And a lot of people aren't ready to have that conversation. They're stuck in the past.
Yeah, that is key. There were two critical things I believe that you brought up that we, might come back to and touch on, is when you talk about this issue, it even goes beyond slavery. It goes generationally after slavery. When you talk about Reconstruction, when you talk about Jim Crow, it seems like in every generation after the end of slavery, there were new ways conceived to re-enslave the group of people. And there has been confusion that has happened perhaps over the last 50 years or so, where we conflate the history of now what we are referring to as ADOS with a larger idea of blackness. And that is where there's a lot of the confusion, where people are, whether it's being willful about it, whether it's being perhaps not so honest about it, are you challenging my blackness? No, we're not. It's not about a challenge of blackness. It's a matter of, as you've described, lineage. The lineage of the people that were brought to this country, the only people that were brought to this country against their will in the hulls of ships. Now, even going beyond what is ADOS, where does ADOS fit in to your political interests? And you talked about there were 16 neighborhoods that make up District 4. How do you represent the interests of ADOS people in light of being a council person of a district that is so diverse otherwise, when you're talking about income levels, when you're talking about interests? And it was interesting, part of what much of your campaign was all about is a Louisville for all, creating a Louisville for all. Could you talk a little more about that?
So I'm going to treat District 4 like I would treat my classroom. And in the classroom, regardless of which grade level you're working with, you have students who soar, who are above and beyond, who understand concepts, who can actually help teach concepts. You have students who are kind of in the middle.
Okay.
You have students who are struggling, who oftentimes when you say no child left behind, they are the child that is still left behind. You have a spectrum of experiences and a spectrum of achievement levels that need to take place. And it's a matter of being equitable, and equitable doesn't always mean fair. And by that, I mean, a perfect example is Beecher Terrace housing projects right up the street from me in the Russell neighborhood.
Right.
We don't necessarily need to look at that project as something that needs to have construction workers or services provided by 23%, which Louisville's 23% black, 23% of of the workers need to be black. I'm looking at it as, no, you're in Russell, you're in our neighborhood where 91% of the residents are black. So let's flip that and now have the mindset that no, minimum we need to have 91% black people working on this project or black businesses on the street.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's not necessarily equitable. It's almost like a veil is being put up under the guise of diversity when it's really not diverse at all. Like, this is our neighborhood. I can't imagine going into Butchertown, trying to set up shop and saying, oh, you need to have 90% black representation. So why would we flip it on its head in a black neighborhood? Right. So I'm very clear about focusing on issues and doing it in a way that's anchored in data, doing it in a way where you can't argue and dispute why the work is being done.
That's
you
critical.
have to focus on the people who need the work and who need the most attention. And in this case, in Louisville's case, just reflective of our country, ADOS are those people. We are those struggling students that I will be focusing on. Right. And not just because I am ADOS, but because it makes sense.
Absolutely. And that is part of the challenge when you have an issue with a city, with a metropolitan area, and you've got a group of people that are left out. They've been cut out. You go beyond even saying a lower class or a bottom class. It's a bottom caste because it is a generational challenge, a generational problem that gets transferred. And it's a lack of wealth, not even just income, getting beyond the issue of income, the issue of wealth, a lack of wealth and a lack of the power, connections, influence, et cetera, that comes, like with that lack of wealth. So all major concerns and issues. Now, when it comes to your political passion, how you've gotten passionate about the ADOS movement and seek to have it be a part of the way that you operate in how you teach, the way that you seek to help govern a Louisville for all, the way that you engage with people in your neighborhood and community. What makes it so important to center ADOS, the political project, in your politics as you are ADOS ethnically as a human being?
If I don't center ADOS as a politician, in many cases, we won't exist anymore. And by that, I mean the Russell neighborhood has the highest poverty rate of any neighborhood in the city, 52.7%. If you can't afford to live in the Russell neighborhood anymore, where do you go?
Right.
That's the difference between what the Root Cause Research Center has taught me. That's the difference between gentrification and racial banishment. Gentrification is when you can move somewhere else. The neighborhood's too expensive for you to live there, so you just go somewhere else. Racial banishment is where you really have nowhere else to go besides the prison yard or the graveyard.
What you see, where do you go? You will go in the places, you'll see all these almost like living areas, tent cities almost, under bridges, under viaducts. That's where the people are going. And you mentioned something, the concern about a group of people's potential annihilation. Given some of the wealth data that exists, it has been predicted that Black Americans will be at zero wealth by 2053, but I fear that projection has been accelerated by this pandemic. And you have a situation where when you tear down a bunch of rundown things that haven't been given the care, have been neglected for generations, because that neglect, whether it be benign or malignant, has had real negative effects upon a group of people. So Then a decision is made, okay, we're going to tear this down. We're going to build new shiny stuff. We're going to build new shiny stuff, and we'll bring in people who can afford the new shiny stuff. But what happens to the people left behind? Mm-hmm. You turn them into refugees.
Mm-hmm. And what's sickening about this reality, pre-COVID, when Metro did a housing needs assessment, 78% of the unhoused, homeless, unsheltered, living on the streets population was Black.
Wow.
Pre-COVID-19,
78%.
78%, where people are being kicked out of their homes left and right.
Now, the national numbers are, when it comes to Black Americans, I understand the national numbers are 40% nationally. 50% of families are Black families, and likely ADOS families, because that could be part of a larger discussion that we have in the future.
Yeah. So in Louisville, we almost double that 40%.
Yeah, you're looking at 78% pre-COVID, and we may be looking at a potential eviction-ocalypse, like for Louisville residents, because loss of jobs, loss of ability to pay existing rents, even if the rents are $450, $500 a month, $600, $700 a month. What happens when you have a neighborhood where those rents go up to $1,200, $1,500, $1,750 a month? What happens to that group of people then? What are the solutions ultimately that get more money into the afflicted people's pockets?
To drive those fears and those very much so like predictable realities home even more, I just got census data for August 2020 not too long ago. And that census data showed, keep in mind, not everyone has completed it, but we have, at this point, less than a month to complete it.
Right.
Not everyone has completed it, but what we got back was that our district is 44% Black.
44%?
To put that into context, in December 2019, when Councilwoman Barbara Sexton Smith, who represents the district right now,
yes,
when she announced she was not running for re-election, she shared what I believe to be the current census data of December 2019, that our district was 73% Black.
From 73 to 44% perhaps in this time. So the migration, the forced migration has already started happening. And that is a reveal of the dangers of a wealthless people and the lack of policy in seeking to deal with any of that in any kind of substantial manner. Hence, on a national level, the ADOS movement. How does this sort of work, these sort of interests, what are your thoughts on how it needs to be made manifest or made useful policy-wise on a local level?
Well, we use that information and we bring it to our local politicians, such as myself, who's already game and privy to it.
Yes.
But we bring it to the rest of the council. We bring it to state legislators and say, this is what's happening. These are the numbers. What are you going to do about it? And it's important to anchor it in the data, because some people might hear the numbers and think, okay, data, what do we do with that? You use that as a tool of measurement.
Yes.
So if we're looking at a neighborhood that has 52.7% poverty, at the end of my term, let's talk about that number.
Yes.
Now, not all of that number is about what the council person does, because I only represent about half of Russell.
Right.
But what I do or don't do will definitely play into that number in itself. And let's be very clear about this data, about homelessness, about poverty, about incarceration, about school suspensions,
right,
which are 40% nationally for Black people. We represent 40%.
And all of these situations are effects.
Right.
They're effects of the wealthlessness.
Yeah, it's not our fault, because some people hear me say this and think, you're shaming Black people. I'm not shaming Black people at all. A lot of these conditions were created before we were even thought of, let alone born, let alone living these conditions.
Exactly.
I don't believe any of us want to be poor. None of us want to live on the streets. None of us want our kids suspended. Our kids don't want to be suspended.
No.
We exist in this country, in this reality, because we were forced to be here. And it's no different from us being forced to be here, as
Yes.
in the most poor, the most incarcerated,
Right.
the most homeless, the most starved, the most excluded, neglected group.
Yeah.
It's all a matter of us being forced into these positions. And I'm here to say, this is what's happening. Let's organize and do something about it so that we can prevent it from happening again, so we can work on a future for our kids, for our grandkids. And a lot of people aren't ready to have that conversation, but we
It's
ain't
a
got
conversation
time.
that
Yeah.
needs to be had.
Exactly.
And you have taken the mantle to be one of the human beings to do it. And that's why you got my vote, brother.
Thank you.
That is one of the reasons why it's an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this political project to educate America and help America get a little closer to that ideal of a more perfect union. That's the challenge that we had. You mentioned the importance and how critical data has to be, the power of measurement. That's why I'm excited about nonprofits such as the Root Cause Research Center, because I'm a believer that there needs to be a color of wealth study, just as economist Dr. Sandy Darity has been conducting at Duke, and how he's done it in the cities of Miami, in Los Angeles, and in Boston. When you have a reality where Los Angeles Black Americans only have $200 liquid, where Bostonians, like their level of wealth, they only have $8 of wealth. In Miami, it's $11. I would like to see, like the wealth numbers in the city of Louisville, and to have a detailed critical study, not income. We need to see the raw, naked truth. And even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's painful, that provides the starting point towards solutions,
Absolutely.
towards healing.
If there's no data, there's no progress.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine teaching in a classroom and just assuming the progress or the achievement of the students. Like, I have to know that you failed this terms quiz at this point in time, and now you've passed it or you've gotten a better grade.
Right.
If you don't have the data, if you don't have that tool of measurement, you have no clue if we progressed or not. You're
Right.
just kind of shooting in the dark at that point.
Well, that, just makes it, that made it so wonderful for me. Just even my background, education, Pan-African Studies minor, political science as my master's, and the work that I discovered when I discovered the ADOS Political Project and the work of Yvette Cornell and Antonio Moore, that they were so data-driven and analyzing that and making it relevant to everyday lives. Sometimes when you see a bunch of cold numbers, folks might not understand it, but you certainly understand it in the sense where if you've got, like a sister that's hitting you up, or someone that's not able to pay their rent, like in, say you do, like you say might have a sister and her kids that might get put out, or, are dealing with the danger of having to get put out because they can't afford something, or the desperation that folks will have if they've lost work. Those are real things, real negative effects that it creates an endless loop that unfortunately some political conservatives like to individualize or fault a group of people without looking at the larger picture, like looking at a situation as if the world started yesterday, looking at what you see now and making judgments based on that without any sort of historical understanding and the problems of that. But see, that's why there are new solutions. That's why there's been a new council person selected. And that's why we're glad to have you here, man.
I'm so excited to get this work done. I can't even put into words the level of intensity it's going to take for us to even just have these type of conversations with people out in the community. Because as I canvassed, as we campaigned, people would say they're voting for me just because I'm black, or they would vote for me just because I'm Democrat, or they will vote for me just because I knocked on their door and didn't even talk to them about my ideologies.
Oh, wow.
That's dangerous.
Right.
And I'm about to show them a whole different type of a politician. And,
Right.
and I have to be very much so clear about the fact that it's not about me being a savior. I'm not a savior whatsoever. I need everyone to do
Right.
this work with me. We all
Right.
got to be a part of the progression of this district, of this city, of this state, of this country. Otherwise, we
The
won't get
importance of
anywhere.
political education.
Exactly.
And, just the importance of political education and the importance of the basic civics, being an involved citizen, what that means, how you can contribute to a greater good and get involved in something. Because no individual, no matter how charismatic, no matter how talented, can do it. It's not a me, it's a we.
No, exactly right. I mean, and what you said about context is so profound. We've seen over triple digits of percentages and increases in shootings and homicides in this city.
Yes.
And what you might see people yapping about, specifically our elders, talking about our youth. Well, I'm talking to those youth who are doing the shootings, who are getting incarcerated.
Right.
And a lot of what they're saying to me is, well, I don't have any guidance, or I don't
Right.
have any outlets. I don't have a father at home. Well, why don't you have a father at home? He was incarcerated in the 90s.
Right.
A victim of the crime bill.
The crime and
It's
the
all
so-called crime,
connected.
the victims of the crime bill and the crime wave that happened in the early to mid 90s and the homicide rate. When you think about just the generational effects that has, because you look at the loss of 2 lives, the loss of a gunshot victim, and then the loss of the person that's incarcerated, and any families, children or families that they have, and that's a cascade effect. And what you are seeing are the effects of that generational poverty and what is basically a forced failure. And then you have victim blaming after the fact. And that's the existing challenge. Look, you deal with the situation. A person has to be accountable for whatever they do. However, we did not get here just because a result of poor choices. It was choices that were made, but it was a directed choice to keep a particular group of people at the bottom and wealthless.
Yeah, it's the cascade effect, the domino effect, and not just singularly a line of dominoes falling. I mean, when you tilt one over and there's a 3-way split, it impacts the whole community because the victim, of course, was killed. That son is now in the system.
Yes.
That son's father is in the system. And now that mother is likely going to be evicted because black women are 2 times more likely to be evicted than white women. So you just have this multi-dimensional, multi-generational just bag of issues that are occurring in our community, and people don't realize that as they blame us, as they do the victim blaming.
Well, your presence as councilman-elect is setting, the state on fire, like with Kentucky Democrats, with the city at large.
Oh, they hate me.
There's been a lot of action and there's been a lot of reaction. However, whether these populations know it or not, whether they like it or not, it's an issue that we have to deal with because this is the challenge of justice. Just for the audience, are there, before we, as we wrap it up and we call it an end of today's Freedom and Justice show of The Lens, what would you want to say to the viewers, to your District 4 constituents out there on what an Arthur term as councilperson looks like?
I will never, and I'll make this commitment now, I've never said it out loud, but I'll make it now. I will never cast a vote for anything as far as legislation goes without doing a vote with our district. I'm not making any decisions until I have weigh-in from as many people in our district as possible, because I'm only there to represent you. You are going to pay my salary.
The constituents are stakeholders.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's about you, it's not about me. So I'm here to represent you, and I can't wait to do that.
Well, Brother Jacory, thank you very much for being on the show with us today. And that is the end of The Lens, the Freedom and Justice Show. Thank you all for tuning in, and tune in next time around when we'll have more education, more freedom, more justice. Power to the people. Goodbye.